Look down at the Earth's agricultural footprint. You are looking at the largest contiguous tract of cotton cultivation on the planet. This map shows India's position. The highlighted landmass represents 39% of global cotton acreage, yet India accounts for only 21% of global production. Shifting to per-hectare yield explains the gap. India harvests 465 kilograms per hectare against a global average above 770. This means an Indian textile export industry valued at over $35.5 billion is built entirely on vast landmass and high volumes of manual labor, rather than agronomic efficiency. Because the growth model relies on physical expansion, requiring more land to produce the same volume as competitors, the math has finally caught up. India has transitioned from a chronic cotton surplus producer into a structural importer. Relying on horizontal scale leaves the entire supply chain severely squeezed by acute, unhedged dependencies at its upstream inputs and its downstream borders. We are going to map this end-to-end value chain to isolate those hidden structural choke points. Possessing the world's largest cotton crop becomes a liability when a nation must import the materials to grow it and the compliance metrics to sell it. This is the dependency flow map. We start at Node 1, Upstream Inputs and Agronomy. Before a seed is planted, the import reliance is absolute. India imports 100% of its potash and half of its DAP directly from Canada, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco. Moving from soil chemistry to genetics, the legally approved Bollgard II seeds carry cryotoxins meant to kill pests, but the pink bollworm has evolved resistance to them. The genetic technology that delivered a massive step change in yield during the 2000s no longer protects the crop today, causing national productivity to flatline. In response, farmers are illegally planting an unapproved herbicide-tolerant, or HTBT, cotton variant. They cultivate this on up to a quarter of the national acreage to save heavily on the cost of manual weeding. The government faces a strict regulatory fork: either legalize and steward HTBT with proper oversight, or maintain an unenforceable ban that forfeits all quality control. This environment has caused a specific, severe genetic failure: the near disappearance of extra long staple, or ELS, cotton, which is the mandatory raw material for premium fine count spinning. The economics of this crop are biologically restrictive. ELS requires over 180 days to grow and yields less per acre, forcing rational smallholder farmers to abandon it for faster-growing BT hybrids. ELS now constitutes less than 1% of the national crop. The collapse of domestic ELS forces India into a permanent, structural dependency. High-end mills must import premium fiber, like United States Pima and Egyptian Giza, just to operate. Advancing to Node 2, ginning, we reach the critical pivot. Here, raw seed cotton, known as kapas, splits into two distinct economies. The defect only appears 3 stages later, ruining the product when the fabric hits the wet processing dye bath. Shifting our focus to the 65% cottonseed split, we find a massive economy that is systematically underanalyzed, despite supporting the national dairy and edible oil markets. 92% of Indian cottonseed is processed through primitive mechanical crushing, rather than undergoing scientific solvent extraction. This traditional method extracts only a fraction of the value, forfeiting roughly 7% of the high-value edible heart oil and leaving a toxic compound called gossypol trapped in the animal feed. This massive loss is sustained entirely by a market information failure. It persists due to a false traditional belief that residual oil in the cake increases cattle milk yields, despite scientific evidence to the contrary. The highest value byproduct of this seed actually comes from the tiny fibers left on the hull after ginning, known as cotton linters. These linters provide the exact cellulose feedstock required to manufacture India's sovereign banknote substrate. The ginning node perfectly isolates the chain's most profound disconnects. It is the point where mechanical flaws are outsourced to downstream buyers, and where sovereign security relies on unrecovered waste. We move now to the spinning sector, where India holds the world's second-largest spinning capacity. This sector operates with extreme financial sensitivity. Raw cotton makes up roughly 62% of a spinning mill's direct input cost. This chart illustrates a critical historical advantage. For decades, the Indian domestic benchmark, line A, traded at a 3 to 5 cent per pound discount compared to the global Cotlook A Index, shown here on line B. This price gap was a market penalty compensating buyers for the higher trash and moisture content of hand-picked Indian cotton. Functionally, it acted as a massive structural subsidy for domestic mills. Two policy shocks erased this advantage. Following massive hikes to the domestic minimum support price, the government imposed a strict 11% import duty on cotton in 2021. The result was devastating for spinners. Indian cotton now trades at absolute parity with the global market, permanently vaporizing the sector's competitive cost mode. Yet we see the Bangladesh paradox. Despite operating at price parity, India continues to export massive volumes of yarn. Roughly 46% of Indian yarn exports go straight to Bangladesh. India acts as the primary raw material supplier for its most direct downstream garment competitor. Domestic price interventions successfully protected the farmer's income, but systematically dismantled the financial viability of the nation's strongest industrial link. Moving into the wet processing and terminal market node, there is a misconception that India is chemically self-sufficient simply because it exports finished textile dyes. The hidden dependency sits one layer deeper. While India exports finished dyes, it heavily imports the precursor chemical intermediates, like H acid and gamma acid, directly from China. Now, this creates a sharp chemical choke point. A single environmental enforcement shutdown in China immediately spikes chemical prices in India, transmitting the shock directly into export garment costs. Beyond chemistry sits the ultimate downstream barrier, terminal market compliance. Exporters now face strict regimes like the UFLPA in the United States and the CSDDD in the European Union. Traceability is no longer an optional marketing credential. It is a strict legal condition of market access. Customs agents now utilize forensic isotopic origin fingerprinting and molecular DNA tagging. They analyze the trace element signature to verify the exact soil origin of the fiber. The stakes are absolute. Failure to technologically prove a garment's origin results in immediate shipment seizure at the border. Global market access is no longer dictated by cheap labor or massive scale. It is dictated entirely by the ability to technologically prove chemical and ethical compliance to foreign regulators. Looking at the complete dependency flow map, the systemic reality of the Indian cotton industry becomes stark. The industry is highly vertically integrated domestically, but incredibly fragile at its borders. It imports its ability to grow the crop, and it exports into a fiercely regulated demand base. Temporarily waiving import duties is a useless policy lever when domestic prices have already permanently converged with global parity. India must officially resolve the HTBT genetic fork, moving to prioritize per-hectare productivity over raw acreage. Furthermore, the industry must embrace forensic traceability as a core product feature, rather than fighting it as an imposed regulatory burden. To survive the next decade of global trade, India must recognize that scale alone is no longer enough. Provenance and productivity are the new, absolute margins of survival in the global textile economy.